Welcome to the Radical Radiance podcast. I am your host, Rebecca George, and I'm so thrilled to be with you today for this special conversation that we have with Maddie Jackson, Selecman. If you do not already know Maddie's story, first of all, she is the daughter of country music star Alan Jackson, and if you have not heard her story, about 3 years ago, her husband suffered from a traumatic brain injury after only about 10 or 11 months of marriage. And in her newest book, Lemons on Friday, she unpacks her season of loss and grief and how she has seen God's faithfulness in the midst of her deepest heartbreak. And I just jumped at the chance to get to sit down with Maddie and talk about her story and how she's seen God in the midst of tragedy. And it just was such a special conversation to me. It's one that I think you're going to want to share. It's one that I think that you might need a tissue for. So before we get to that conversation, I want to share about one of our sponsors, the Shine Bright Journal. The Shine Bright Journal is a free downloadable 100-page journal that you can go grab today at radicalradiance.live that will walk you through a lot of what we talk about around here. What does it look like to radiate the heart of Jesus in all that we do? And so I would love for you to go grab it for free at radicalradiance.live. All right, let's give a big welcome to our new friend, Maddie Jackson Selecman, to the show. I am so grateful to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thank you, Rebecca. I'm excited to chat and get to know you a little more.
No, this is going to be so fun. So I have to thank my mom for this conversation because she found your book and heard you interview. I forget where she heard about your book originally, but she reached out to me and she was like, I would just wonder if there's any way that you guys could talk because I feel like you guys would hit it off. And she just is such an amazing woman and I love her story and I want you to talk to her. And so I remember reaching out to your publisher and I was like, okay, my mom told me about this book that Maddie wrote and I need to know, can we chat about it? And so I'm excited to get to know you better. This feels so special to me for so many reasons because when I grew up on your dad's music, so we can start there. Like Alan and Garth were pivotal things of my childhood. And so when even driving home from somewhere the other day, I was listening to some of your dad's music and I'm like immediately in the red Tacoma that my dad drove as a child on the way to the park to go on a walk or something. And so it just feels real special to get to chat with you. So I'm so excited. And we're here really because you have released your book, Lemons on Friday, that we get to chat about. The subtitle is Trusting God Through My Greatest Heartbreak. And I know there's going to be people who know bits and pieces of your story and listeners who have not heard about your story yet. And so I'd love for you to give those who maybe haven't heard yet just kind of a little bit of a recap of the last couple years of your life that have led to the story of this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad's Alan Jackson. I grew up in Nashville and kind of around the music industry and regrettably am not as musical as he. So I did not go into that, but I did hopefully get a little bit of the writing gene. It's actually what I studied in college and I've always wanted to be an author, to be honest. And this has been probably a 12-year dream that has just been realized. And that's something we can go into a whole lot later, but just using my greatest heartbreak to make this longtime dream come true. I mean, it's insane the way that he works. And but after college, came back to Nashville, met Ben Selecman, who is my husband, and just fell in love with him so quickly. He was just like this vibrant, joyful, just charismatic man. And I'm really grateful looking back that our love story was pretty fast. We dated for about a year, engaged for a year, and then were married just shy of a year. When we were coming up on our first wedding anniversary, we were in Florida with my sisters. I have two younger sisters. They're boyfriends at the time and some friends, and just celebrating. It was Labor Day, celebrating the holiday, and multiple of them had birthdays. And so my dad is a big fisherman, which he does have some songs about. So he has a fishing boat down there. We were in Florida, and we had gone out on it one night and had like a dinner cruise, and we stopped at this little tiki bar, and they had like music and dancing and all sorts of stuff. And so we just had a great time. And then we were getting back on the boat to go back to the hotel where we were staying. You know, South Florida just has like random, pop-up thunderstorms all the time. So it had been a little shower, whatever. So it was wet. And we were walking to get back up on the boat and climbing up the little metal steps. And he was helping some of us get back on. And his sandal just hit the steps the wrong way. And he slipped and fell back and hit his head on the concrete dock. And at that point, I was making sure he was okay, but he sort of just like shook his
Yeah.
head and came back to, and it almost seemed like a sports injury or something. Like I was thinking maybe he'll have
Mm.
a concussion, whatever. And by God's grace, truly, there were two off-duty EMTs at the little tiki bar where we were, and they came over and kind of checked him out and said, you need to take him to the ER immediately. So we called
Yeah.
an ambulance, went in, and still at this point, not being too overly concerned. I'm like, I'm glad we're being cautious, but we get there, and at this point, by the
Sure.
time you're there and you're checked in and all the stuff, the ER is surprisingly not a super expedient experience all the time. It's like midnight. I'm in Florida. I don't know where I'm at. And, I'm kind of
Yeah.
just in this dream state of what's going on. And, the neurosurgeon comes in and says, his brain's starting to swell from the impact, and we don't have to do surgery right away, but we might in the next 24 hours. And so that really shocked me into the reality of this is far more than a concussion, and I have no idea what to do. So at that point, I, of course, called his parents and my parents. They both were able to come down the next day. And then from there, it was 12 days in the ICU. He was in a medically induced coma to try to mitigate the swelling, multiple sort of brain surgeries. And after 12 days, he ended up having multiple strokes, and the neurosurgeon came back and said, he's brain dead. Like, here are your options.
Yeah.
And it was never the outcome that we expected. And part of that is just because we should fight in prayer and we should hope until the end. And it was not a denial of reality. It was just, we're going to keep fighting. And so when that was the final verdict, it still didn't feel real to me. And honestly, Rebecca, like, I went home, well, not home, but to the hotel that night and just prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. Like, this is what you do. Like, you do miracles. Like, make him the miracle. Like, make these people in this hospital be so in awe of you because of what you're about to do. And I know you can do, and I believe you can do that, their lives and their hearts are changed. And until the middle of the night that next night, like, I still believed he was going to do that. And I think that's okay. We're like, I'm just diving right in the deep end. I'm sorry, but
please do.
And people have asked, like, do you feel like that prayer went unanswered? And obviously in a physical way it did, but in all the other ways, he answered this miracle prayer. And in all these other ways, people's hearts are being changed because of Ben's story. And it's not because he saved his body. It's because they've watched me have to deal with everything after God let him go home, even though that's not what I wanted. So it's, that was 3 years ago, this past September. So September 2018. And this book is truly a behind the scenes look at me just grieving and me being forced to face really hard questions like, do we pray for miracles? And like, what is God's hand in Ben's death? And things that every person who believes in a good God and a sovereign God has to reconcile or at least deal with when something tragic happens. So the book is truly was birthed out of my own journals, processing my pain and processing, hard questions about me and about my future and about God. And, I thought at one point, if I have all these issues and all these doubts and all of these, desperate needs for answers, then other people do too. And so that's what's in these pages.
Friends, quick break in this conversation to remind you of something. If you are loving the show, you're loving the conversations we're having, it would mean the absolute world to me if you would leave a rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts for Radical Radiance. When that happens, when more of those happen, the show gets put in front of more women. And in turn, it allows them the opportunity to take part in conversations that will show them more about what it looks like to radiate the heart of Jesus. And I can't think of anything better than that. So it would mean the world to me if you would take just 2 minutes of your time and leave a rating and a written review. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, well, and it is, Maddie. I mean, and I just want everybody to hear, you are a phenomenal writer. And I love that it's been a lifelong dream of yours. It's been a lifelong dream of mine too. I'm working on my first book right now. And so I know what that process is like to walk with walk with the Lord to, it's one thing to have an idea and it's another thing to make it a thing that's going to serve other people. I'm curious, what was that path like for you? As you know, you've had this lifelong dream, but I know this isn't the book that you thought you'd write first, right? And it's the book that I wish we weren't here to talk about. I wish that we were having a much easier conversation than we're having in this episode. But what was that like for you to discover, okay, God, like this is the thing that you want me to write first?
Yeah, it was pretty, I mean, it was a very slow and organic process. I think somewhere in my heart, when all of this happened, there was a seed that was planted. But I mean, at the beginning, you can't even begin to fathom, anything besides how do I survive this and how do I keep moving forward one day at a time. And so part of my moving forward and trying to understand what I was just feeling was journaling because I love writing. So that's how it started. And truly for a year, probably 6 months to a year, I was just putting on paper the questions, the struggles, the anger, the little moments of hope and the God nods to remind myself that he's still in this, even though it's hard to see sometimes. And truthfully, after about 6 months, I think that was when I started to think, okay, maybe this could be a book, and sort of started to like pray about it, and truly got like a pretty hard stop from the Holy Spirit at that point that was like, you're not ready. Like you're nowhere near to a place of healing where you can help heal other people, and you need to just keep this between you and me for a while. And so that was kind of hard to hear, because from the beginning, my prayer was, and my mom writes this in the foreword of the book, the prayer always was, God, like, make this big for your kingdom. Like, if you're going to make me go through this, the only way I can do it is if I see the purpose, and if I see that our marriage and his death and my pain matters to people. But there was this holding pattern he had to put me in before he really gave me the green light to say, okay, let's start to take our work from just inside you and start to sort of turn it outward. And so after about a year and a half, I continued to pray on this, and it kept being wait. And about a year and a half into it, I was reading C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed that he wrote after he lost his wife to cancer. And I remember reading it, in so many places in there, feeling like this is the most seen I've ever felt. Like, he's putting words to everything that I've just been sort of word vomiting in my journal for a year and a half. If this man who is, was born a century and a half before me, who's no longer alive, can have the most profound impact on me feeling like I'm not alone in this, then, like, please, Lord, let my story do that. And I think at that point he had sort of gotten to where the message was, okay, let's do this. Like, let me lead you in this. And so I just went back and like looked at everything, all of my journals, and just sort of tried to piece together, okay, what are the similar themes? What are the similar questions? Like, what are the similar timelines and experiences? And, from there, for the last year and a half, I've been working with the publisher and making it a full-fledged book. And so it's been incredibly healing and cathartic for me at every phase. But I think that there was a big lesson for me in the waiting. I'm not a patient person, and I wanted to see purpose for my pain immediately. And I think that there is a kindness from God in preparing us beyond what we know we need, And so I think he did that for me. And I think if I had rushed, I wouldn't be able to sit here with peace and wisdom in the same way and have this conversation with you. So that's sort of been the last 3 years.
Yeah. There's a book idea that's been stirring in me, but I told a friend the other day, like, it'll probably be years before I write this, because I want it to be a scar and not a wound. You know, like, I think there's just power in that. And I think we can stand with more confidence as a writer when we're in that place. So I love that you were obedient to that holding pattern, even though I know that was hard. Jumping into the book, when I was reading, I had a pad of sticky notes handy, and I just wrote questions like as I thought of them, because I didn't want to forget anything. And then I started realizing I had like 20 sticky notes in the book by like chapter 3. And so preparing for this was really hard, because I have so many questions for you. One of the first things that really stood out to me that I know, our friends listening who have experienced grief know a lot about is this illusion of control that we lose, right? When we're going through the grieving process, and how that just kind of slips away in the midst of a story like yours. And I'm curious, what was it like to lose that illusion, and why does that idea matter, that really, like that control really isn't there, and how do we live, in that truth on the other side of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. The reason I think I started the book that way is because I think that was one of the more painful things I had to grieve at the beginning, obviously in addition to Ben in our
Mm,
life. But there's a million things you have to grieve and lay down when you lose someone that's an intimate part of your life. And I think early on that was the feeling that I felt, was I am completely out of control of my life. I think
hmm
especially because I hadn't gone through anything really tragic. When things go well, you feel like you sort of have a heavier hand in things than you do. And obviously, I am a proponent of preparation and plans, and those are important, and you have to live life that way. But I think the biggest difference for me now is that I don't have a death grip on those things, because it doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter how hard you hold your plan. It doesn't matter how hard you hold your people. Like, life is broken and life happens. And I think at the
Mm,
beginning, I felt so frustrated about that, because it made me feel like, why do we even plan? Why do we even do anything? You get in that sort of despondent place.
yeah.
But from there, I think it was actually, kind of it felt eventually like a relief. It
Mm,
originally felt very much like a frustration and sort of like cruel, from God. Like,
hmm
why we have this free will, but like, why does it matter? Honestly, was the darkest place you go to. And then eventually it brought me to a place where, you know what, I can just exhale, because this is all in your hands. And that does feel scary,
Yeah.
because we have a false sense of safety when it's in our hands. But ultimately, that loss of control pushed me toward a life that is more about surrender. And that is a really, really safe place to be. But I
Mm,
think it takes losing something that drastic to know that you're not in control, because we can manipulate even hard situations. We can manipulate to try to make easier. But when there's
yeah.
nothing I could have done to fix anything about my life, it's like, okay, you know
hmm
what? It's all yours. I mean, I have no choice. And that's a
Yeah.
good thing in the end, but it is a very scary thing when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And kind of going off of that, I earmarked a page in the book, and I hope it's okay if I read a few
Oh, please.
paragraphs that just totally wrecked me, kind of related to this, and just watching you wrestle through, how do I see God's goodness in the midst of all this? So, all right, I'm going to read this for us. I'm starting to see that the real subtitle of the Bible is Lemons on Friday, but we never lead with these promises for suffering. We never start with the agony of Crucifixion Friday, but with the glory of Resurrection Sunday. We do all we can to not live our lives in the fear of Friday or Saturday, but to hoard, herald, and hold captive the joy of Sunday. Why wouldn't we? We long for Sunday just as we long for lemonade. Sour lemons, suffering, and death aren't much of a sales pitch to follow Christ. Come hurt with us. Come bear the broken world's bullets with us. These are words you'll never see on the church's marquee sign. But the truth is, in vain attempts to evangelize and convert, we've diluted the gospel into sugar water for the sake of the Great Commission. In trying to pacify our doubts and bolster our broken hearts, we hold tight to the promises, victorious endings, but hush their assurance of painful beginnings. That is, until life gives us lemons, the bitter, stomach turning, smile stealing lemons that Scripture reveals over and over again in the lives of its most celebrated saints. This is where we doubt God's goodness, isn't it? In our times of ravenous need, he sits on his throne and watches us grimace while we eat lemons. Our deepest desire is for him to take them away, to give us a single bite of something sweet. We hurt and we wonder, did God plan for our pain, or did he sit back and allow it? Neither picture shows us much of a loving, good God, does it? Don't funerals of 28-year-old husbands give legitimate cause for the universal cry, with all this suffering, how can God be good? I wish I had a foolproof, pastor-approved answer to that question, both for your sake and mine. I don't. What I can tell you is that in the middle of my worst nightmare come true, even when I didn't know how to talk to God or trust God, God continued to show me he was good. And I just want to hear more about that. Tell us, how did he show you that he was good in the midst of that moment? And I just want to hear you process that, because I can't help but think somebody's listening that may be in the midst of something really similar.
Yeah, I think what the shift had to be for me was that, naturally when we think of God and his goodness, we imagine that playing out in terms of the quote unquote good things he does in our lives and the good things that he gives us. And those are part of his goodness. Like, he's a generous God and a God of provision, and that he loves to bless us because he loves us. I think that the danger is when that's how we define his goodness, when in reality it's just a facet of his goodness that we can't understand. And I think what I mean in that passage and what I really felt, and I mean like palpably felt, especially in the early days of grieving, is not that God let Ben die for my good. I don't believe that. I think it's a broken world. I think accidents happen and people slip. Yes, as a sovereign God, did he make a choice to not physically make Ben's body a miracle? Yes, he did. And that does not feel good to me. But his character is always good. And I think because he is a intimate God and a personal God and a tender God, I started to feel his goodness in the way that he dealt with me in the very, very worst days of my pain. And somehow that reminded me, and that was enough for me to know that he was good, even though his actions didn't feel good. And I did a talk with a widow group that I work with, and sort of was just encouraging them, when you feel like what God has not done in your life, it does not feel good, kind of treat it like someone that you love most, the people that you love most, your husband, your children, your parents, your siblings, whatever, the people that you know their heart and you really trust, and you know that there's nothing they would do to intentionally harm you. They still hurt you. We're still fallen people. They still say things they shouldn't. They still are inconsiderate, whatever. And when people like that hurt me, I have to remind myself, I know their heart, and I know their heart is good, even though their actions don't feel good. And we have to do that with God. And the way that you do that is by going to his word and seeing the person of Jesus and really asking him like for what you need, and he shows up and he is good. I mean, I don't know how else to say it besides, even when his actions don't feel like they are, his heart is good. And I felt that in such extreme ways that I never did before. And even just in words from a friend that I knew didn't come from them, that they wouldn't normally say to me, or when somebody provided or did something for me. Or I talk a lot about nature in the book. I never felt God in creation in such an encompassing way as in my grief. And I think that's something that's really good. Like, you see his faithfulness in the world around you. And so that helped me trust, okay, you're faithful with these flowers and the sunset and the tides and all this stuff. And I know that means you'll be even more faithful to me. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I think it's about it.
Yeah, that's so good. And I want to jump back to this one specific place. You're talking about Ben's time in the hospital, and specifically how you chose to hope even when you didn't know how the story was going to end. I think we all are going to face moments like that, no matter how God ultimately answers the prayer, right? And so how did you wrestle with that in that specific, those few days? And how would you want to encourage somebody now that we can look back in retrospect? How would you want to encourage somebody that's there now?
I mean, I would say, just as a disclaimer, I'm not a huge worrier just by nature. I'm not like patting my own back. I'm a pretty hopeful person in general, like almost to a fault. I want to see the good. So I think that is just in sort of my nature. When I look back, I think like what good would have come if I had focused on the worst outcome that could have happened. Like, how would that have helped? I think is what my perspective was, in that it's just what Jesus says, like about who by worrying can add an hour to your life. You can't. And that's not to flippantly dismiss worry or like real negative outcome. But I think in those days, what empowered me the most and what gave me the most strength and energy was to claim the ultimate best outcome that I knew could happen. I mean, if you really believe in a God who redeems everything, which he does in some way, to me, I felt better saying, redeem his body on this earth. That's the best thing I can imagine happening. And yes, does that set you up to feel more let down or betrayed when the prayer is not answered in the way that you prayed? Yeah. And I experienced that, and my family experienced that, and his family experienced that. But I think, why would you not come boldly and ask for the best of the best Because when God hears that, he hears, I trust you. I trust you above everything else
Yeah.
and above circumstance. And it is really, really painful when you don't get that answer. But I think that every prayer you pray builds trust with God. And so why would you temper them down just because you're afraid you might get disappointed, or you're afraid of the worst outcome that could happen? Because even when the worst outcome happens, you're gonna need him. So why not ask for
Yeah.
everything he can do? But just like the plans, like, you have to hold it with an open hand. And I wasn't ready for death to be the outcome. And
Yeah.
if that's what I had been anticipating, I just think that those days would have been so much more. I don't know that I could have done it, honestly.
Yeah. 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 And and we've seen evidence of God doing both, right? We've seen evidence of God working through prayer, and by going to his throne and by praying, him acting in a certain way. And I have had times in my life where I have prayed fervently for something that was not God's best for me, and I didn't understand the no. And it was not nearly as hard of a no as what we're talking about today. And we don't see it all, right? Like, there was no way that you could see this book that I hold in my hands in the midst of that season. And I can't fathom the number of wives that have this in their hands, that have this encouragement now because of what you went through. God knew. Like, he knew how he was going to be faithful in your story, and how he wanted to use it for his glory and for his kingdom, and how it would matter, right? Like we talked about
Yeah.
in the very beginning. And I think those are the things that we love to see fruit, right? We love to see the outcome and what he's going to do through it. And some of that we don't get to see till heaven. And I'm glad that he gives you this glimpse of the fruit that came from that part of your life. But that is something that we have to wrestle with. And one of the other pieces that I thought was so wise for you to include in the book, and you reference Lisa TerKeurst. I forget which book it is that she writes it in, about little funerals. I want to talk about that for a minute. So for people who haven't read the book yet, you talk about having little funerals for the ways life now looks differently than you had expected. And in this section you say, the Lord winces each time he watches us live out another little funeral. He hurts for us, his beloved children, when we must engage in a new battle with grief and give up another piece of what we wanted our life to look like. But he also smiles because he knows we are being reshaped, restored, and reworked into something even more resilient and beautiful. I'm curious, how do you think that thought of stopping to grieve that little thing along the way, how has that helped you become more resilient throughout this whole process?
Ooh, that's a good way to ask that. I think because in a spiritual sense, each little funeral is another reminder of God's faithfulness, because he shows up in them and he gives you endurance once again, and he heals another distinct wound once again. So I think in grieving one thing after another, in a way it feels like, this is so cruel, why do I have to do this over and over? And honestly, that's sort of how I felt, and that's where the whole idea came from, because I read the Lisa thing initially and I was like, I hate this. Like, this is not, I don't want to keep grieving. Like, I don't want to do this over and over. I don't want, at every turn, something that should feel like celebration feels like sorrow, and I'm over it. Like, I'm over it. But in enduring and doing that and inviting God into each of those facets of our life that we have to give up, that we dreamed of, that we planned for, that we wanted, his good heart shows up in it with us again, and so it just creates this track record of, this life is hard, and I am going to let bad things happen because of reasons you can't understand, but I'm always going to be with you in it. And that's so valuable. And even just from a practical standpoint, it was like a reminder for me that I could make it, like I could do this again, and that nothing that happens to us in this life that we can't control can ultimately be to our demise if we don't let it, and if we let Jesus do it with us. And so it sort of just felt like it built my confidence in the fact that I can endure this life with the Lord, and it also built my confidence in the Lord is never going to leave me in any of these little funerals and any of these things. It's the hardest. I don't want to say it's the hardest part, because all of it's hard, but any person or thing or opportunity or season that you lose is not just about the thing or the person that's gone. It's about the ripple effect that it has on the rest of your life. And that's sort of what that's
Yeah.
about. And, 3 years later, there are things that I plan to do with Ben that I'm watching people in my life do with their husbands that I have to take a second and grieve it and be like, you know what, I still hate this, but I still know that this is a wound that you're working to make a scar. And that is a thing that
Mm.
takes time. And,
Yep.
if we could feel the whole impact of our pain and it really was one big funeral, like we wouldn't survive. I know that now. It has to
Yeah.
be spaced out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my friends was a few years ago in counseling, and she called me after she left her counselor once, and she said, I think this is something her counselor had told her. She said, I think what you're seeing happen over time is you're seeing the pressure valve release,
Yeah.
but not all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we come in this room and this happens, and I think she was upset because she, every time she would go to counseling, she would just bawl her eyes out. And her counselor would say, like, praise God that the pressure valve doesn't explode. Right. Like,
Yeah.
I thought that was the best metaphor. And so she said, like, every time we come in this room, this is an opportunity to slowly turn that valve and allow the pressure to release a little bit at a time. And I just thought that was so powerful because I think sometimes, and I know I have a little bit of this in my personality, I will just shove it under the rug and not process it. I think that's one thing that we can do that leads to a lot of bitterness and a lot of resentment and a whole host of other problems, right? And so I think there's just such power in stopping and letting that pressure valve release and having those little funerals over time. So I just think that's such a powerful thought. And I'm curious, as you look back over the last 3 years, how have people loved you well throughout your loss? Like, how would you want to encourage people who maybe have a friend or a family member who's walking through something similar? Like, what was a gift to you? What was not helpful? Like, you can even talk about that if you want to. I just want to know how we can love people well.
I think this is going to sound pretty simple and probably not that helpful. All I wanted for a long time was for people to show up and be there. I just didn't want to be alone. And my people did that tremendously well. And I guess the encouragement is you don't have to do as much as you feel like. I think more than anything, especially in a situation that's really devastating like death, there's nothing you can do. Like, you can't fix anything. And I think, God bless, all my people wanted so badly to be able to fix something. And I was just like, there's nothing to fix. I just don't want to be alone. And so, however the person that you love, whatever their circumstances, anytime that I think you can afford them the choice, do you want to be alone or do you want someone to be with you? That's something that was really, really practical that my friends and family did really well. I mean, most of them are pretty type A, so they had an actual spreadsheet for like probably 6 to 8 weeks that everybody was on call for a day. And if I needed them, they were there. And if I felt like I'm okay, I need my own space today, I would call them off and they wouldn't come. And that was so practical and kind, but I just felt so loved. And the fear of, oh my gosh, what if I end up by myself and I'm depressed and having a meltdown and I can't get anybody? That wasn't a reality for me for 2 months. And that was so practical. And, another thing that I tell people is, again, a practical level, your mind is so chaotic and so exhausted when you're grieving that open-ended answers are hard. Like, hey, what can I do for you today is really hard. And you don't really know the answer. But when people started to say, hey, I've got a couple hours this afternoon, could I come do your laundry or would you want to go on a walk? Or neither. That I could do. So I think like closed-ended questions. Yep. And then truthfully, I remember one specifically asking one day, like she started to kind of ramble about her work or her husband or something. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't mean to put all my stuff on you. And I was like, honestly, I'm so happy. Tell me all of the crap that's going wrong in your life because I just want to be in your life for a minute. So I think then they started to approach me and say, hey, do you want to talk like about you today? Do you want to talk about Ben today? Or do you want to just kind of like get lost in my life for a minute? And it's different on either day, but that was such a kind, helpful thing and sort of rhythm to establish with them. Yeah, because sometimes you just like, I would want to call you and be like, Rebecca, tell me everything that's going on in your life so I forget about mine for a second. And some days I would want to tell you about Ben and how I was feeling. So I hope those are, practical takeaways for people.
That is very helpful. We have a friend. So my husband's a pastor and we both moved down when we got married to little town in South Mississippi where we're serving right now. And my husband has a couple of friends, and I think this is so kind in a totally different life circumstance, but ministry is hard, right? Like church is hard. And he has a friend that will say to him, like, if you want to talk about the church, we'll talk about the church. If you want to talk about like literally anything but the church, we'll talk about literally anything but the church, you know? Yeah. And I've always thought that was the most kind way to be a friend. No matter, I think you can take that concept and put it in a lot of different areas of friendship or life circumstance. And I think that's so good. So I love that. Well, you mentioned this kind of at the beginning of the episode, but I loved the foreword that your parents wrote. And one of the things that they talk about is, you know, their prayer for your story. And I'll read this little quote from them. No parents would ever wish this kind of grief and heartbreak on their child. We would turn back time in a second if we could, but we can already see how our loving Heavenly Father is using Maddie's story for good and for his purposes. And we know that Ben's legacy of faith will live on through her words. And like, I love seeing how that's happening. And I just want to hear, like, how does that encourage you? Even though it doesn't take the pain away and it doesn't take away from the loss, like how does it encourage you to know right now there are women reading your book and women and men reading your book that are walking through something similar and you get to be a part of that, you know?
Yeah. I said to you before we started recording, like this whole experience is just so powerful in my heartbreak because it reminds me that my pain matters and his death matters and our marriage matters. And I think just as humans, the worst kind of pain we can experience is one that we don't think matters. And I think just in God's hands, that would be what I would tell people is your pain always, always matters. Like, is it going to look like a book? Maybe not. Is it going to look like a ministry? Maybe not. Are you going to be on podcasts? Maybe not. But there will be a person or people that walk through what you walk through and they need you to be the hope that they can't see for themselves yet. And that in and of itself is redemption. Like that in and of itself is the most powerful encouragement and the most, the most precious fuel for resilience is what I've experienced because again, it makes you know that your pain matters. And there's just something about being able to be a light for someone else that makes me a little more okay with, you know, what happened to me. And not that it matters if I'm okay with it, but it's just, I don't know. It just gives purpose to the pain. And that's all I ever wanted. And God does that with all of our pain if we let him. And it will look different for every person, but he doesn't waste it if we bring it to him.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. Well, there's a question that I love asking all of our guests. So the show is called Radical Radiance, which really the heart behind it is creating resources and conversations that allow women to see more of what it looks like to radiate the heart of Jesus in our life, our work, our loss, our marriage, our relationships. And God kept bringing me back to this verse in Psalm 34, it's verse 5, and it says, those who look to him are radiant and their faces are never covered in shame. And I love this thought that when we're in the presence of God, when we're spending time with him, radiance is what happens in us, right? As we do that, and it's not what we're striving for. It's the product of us spending time with him. And so the question I love asking is, Maddie, what about Jesus makes you radiant?
Oh man. I think it's his tenderness toward us, which maybe seems like a counterintuitive answer, but I think a lot of what makes him glorious and makes him radiant is that he will get down in the very worst of it with us and just like hold our hand. And that's what I have learned about the Lord in this grieving season that I didn't know before. Like we know he's powerful. We know he's on the throne. We know that he conquers sin and death, but we also need to know that on our very worst day, he literally just wants to hold us. And I think that is ultimately where my joy comes from now, is that he's there. He is with me. He has what I need. I will never be stuck in the worst day, and the worst day will never be the end of my story. Somehow that just gives me this ridiculous hope that, you know, that he promises to make all bad things untrue is not actually what Revelation says, but to paraphrase. But I think it's his tenderness and his like daily presence with us that I didn't know that I needed in such a desperate way until I needed it in such a desperate way. And now it's a part of my